Sonic the Hedgehog book 1993. At first I didn't find this book, and for some reason, Stay Sonic came up in the search results before it. So it's not until the next book where I'll recap my opinions of Sadie M in depth. I like that it takes until the 7th page to get to the story, even if it's just the prologue. Because that means there's less room for words to read and less room for padding in the story. It starts out by saying that any fun is banned by Eggman, which is the laziest attempt at trying to explain how he'd be as a ruler, to the point where that's not what I want to be told in a world where he is one. What I mean is, it'd be more interesting to see what his, beliefs are. He wouldn't want to rule like that in a country that he's living under. So it tells you nothing about him that you don't already know. You already know he's sadistic. It also wastes my time by recapping all of Sadie M's backstory, including explaining that Sonic used to live with his uncle, even though you'll find out it's a Sadie M book anyways when the Sadie M characters start getting used. It says Eggman would spend all day trying to make robots in Chuck's backyard. That proximity to Chuck is reminding me of an early Archie Sonic story called What If Sonic and Eggman Grew Up Together? As if a novel isn't boring enough, this is feeling insanely pointless to put myself through because it's not creative. Chuck tells Sonic he burned out another pair of shoes. I already knew that was happening to him in the second Archie Sonic story, and there he had fixed it. It blatantly wastes my time with Chuck timing how fast Sonic is for a page. He tells Sonic not bad and plans to make shoes that can handle his speed, and has already made a Sadie M ring that arbitrarily will only work for Sonic. Sonic says Eggman steals parts from his equipment to make robots. Chuck somehow says, "Oh, I don't know," instead of checking his equipment and calling the cops and getting a restraining order. There's no reason Sonic would come to that conclusion while being wrong. Instead of respecting him, he somehow decides to tell Sonic to take a wrench to Eggman. And Sonic is enough of a pushover to agree. At least he didn't pick up Sonic angrily for daring to complain about Eggman like in that comic. He's still not being entirely pure good though, because he's telling him to take a wrench to Eggman instead of getting the exercise doing it himself. That's the interesting thing about Chuck though. That occasionally he does make mistakes, and he's got a skeleton in his closet in Archie. The narration says that the first 9 robots Eggman had made had stopped working, because he was just that incompetent. Why write this? It's disrespectful to the main villain in a Sadie M book. This goes against the appeal. I'd rather have slapstick if we're gonna do something like that. Eggman decides to steal the steering parts from Chuck's tractor because he never sees him use it. Just like in that Archie story released in 1993. I couldn't find out what month it was made. All I can find out about the story is that it was made in the same year. I don't know for sure who plagiarized who. I'd rather say it's this guy who did, because for one, the tone of Eggman being bad at robot making is too comical for the writer of some Sadie M books to have thought up on his own. I read up on it and it's official. It's the same story as it. It's about Chuck getting hurt by the tractor he inexplicably has without being a farmer, and how Sonic first met Sally and Archie. So all I care about mentioning about this Boar Fest is what's good and what's different. Maybe Chuck is a farmer. What other use does a tractor have? If I didn't point that out in the Archie review, I must have assumed that there was a different use for a tractor besides the one that we're familiar with. Eggman's robot here pulls off his own head and rolls it around. So I get to see Eggman say his robots never work, ever, and it takes a few minutes to calm down. I know what it's like to be too stubborn to give up, even when it looks like I should. That's why I even found this book. So I won't say logically should have given up. Although I do wonder if that's the case, since he's way more hot-headed than me. If he had been taught robotics the normal way, he would have already known how to do this well. It's no wonder he's struggling. He's probably just learned about it from a book with no teacher to give feedback. why? I wish it was explained he got expelled for his temper. Anyways, nothing not plagiarized happens until Eggman is still able to talk and even complain after the tractor hits something near him. He's not knocked out and comically dazed, and instead he calls out Chuck as dumb, which I pointed out is very true here, and wonders how they're gonna get free. Meanwhile, Sonic's playing baseball by himself as one team against 9 kids on another team. The story is too lazy to explain how the kids look, causing me to automatically picture them as looking like the humans in AOSTH. Oh, at least the illustration shows how one of them looks and hints at how the others look. But it's all the way on the next page from the one where he's showing off in a way where you'd think he'd be unpopular. I've already seen him do this in other things. It's nice to see, but it's not so creative that I wonder how it was come up with. None of the story is, so it's boring me to death. Despite being told that he's too fast for them, he says sorry because he has to go after hearing a cry for help from home. Well, at least it's new that in this one he carries Chuck and Eggman under each arm to get them to the hospital. But the comic was far more believable. How is he strong enough to do that? I don't think it was established at this point in the series that he has minor super strength to make Knuckles kinda redundant. Nothing actually new happens after this. It's just more plagiarism that's a dragged out version of the original story because God forbid it be mandated to be multiple stories. I'm so bored I don't even want to point out the plot holes I already did in Archie Sonic. Just watch my review of issue 3 for details. Although I wish my audio was a bit louder compared to the music in that old stuff. But it's hardly different from how I review otherwise. Why is Chuck even confronting Eggman instead of calling the cops so they can go surprise him? The way he handled it, Eggman's described to go on stealing, and his room ends up filled with CD players and answering machines and stuff. Eggman could have probably been put in prison for life without any chance of becoming ruler of the world. And Chuck failed to stop him because he was somehow too soft. That is not Uncle Chuck. He's supposed to be cool. The rest of the story is completely stolen from the end of that comic story, and then the second story of Archie, which was definitely released before this. Almost no better than what Eggman did to Chuck, but the irony is lost on this writer because his kind of stealing isn't depriving someone of something. So that kind of stealing isn't on the same level, and it's only bad because people would rather see a news story. A copyright strike is closer to stealing because it does deprive someone of something. It says Sonic's 15 when he's still working for his uncle's chili dog stand, that he had apparently not owned yet earlier for some reason. I love that they had to go to Archie because Sadian was too lazy to establish its backstory until season 2. Instead of Sonic dodging a giant checkered ball like from Sonic 1, 10 robot arms pop out of the walls of a factory he delivered chili dogs to, each holding a hammer. If one of them had no hammer and grabbed Sonic, Eggman would have won. So it just is a change that replaces a lazy game reference with something more impressive that's cancelled out by how ill thought out it was, because it could have been brilliant. I had to look it up to see if this was a difference. Another difference is Sonic runs through the factory for no reason instead of being smart enough to instantly worry about Chuck. Oh yeah, and he doesn't interact with an obvious robot and not question it. Also, a team of Swamp Boss tells him to stop in the hall, but Sonic ignores them instead of spin dashing through them, which would have been a good idea. And the rest is just plagiarism. Very boring for me. At least it's new that it says Sally has brown hair when she had blonde in the comic. That's another one of the many positive differences. Along with the refreshing fact that Sonic believes her instead of somehow accusing her of telling fairy tales. He still didn't recognize his own princess on sight though. Sally gives him a giant bucket load of exposition we already know because Sadie M got more exposure than these books. Sally saves his life. More plagiarism. The story at least doesn't describe the Robians as having comical swirly eyes. And at no point is the reprogrammed Chuck saying that he promises to disobey environmental law. There's no jokes that don't respect the tone. Sally getting grabbed by a robot forces Sonic to save her, by destroying the robots. There's more stealing, but this time the story has Sonic and Sally pick up and carry Chuck and Mutsky and run away with them. This only makes the Archie story look worse, because now I'm wondering why they didn't do that in the first place. Since Sonic's tornado would have lasted so long that it would have been perfectly safe trying to pick up and carry his uncle. But apparently he was too scared to do it, and was too stupidly focused on the moment to think to go back for him. Even in Archie, he was able to carry his roboticized dog, so maybe it's not even that he should be too weak to carry him now that he's made of metal. It's so convenient that at no point are Chuck and Mutsky trying to get them to let go to get back to Eggman. Sonic calls Sally's thankfully underground town of Knothole amazing. Oh, I love that she says she loves Sonic's style because he said he's always glad to help when his speed is in need. That's the last time she'll ever be in a good mood around Sonic for him being Sonic. More padding. Then out of nowhere, Sonic's ring is able to deroboticize Chuck and Mutsky. So if he had enough of a level head to use the ring on the whole crowd of Robians, he might have deroboticized all of them. It's believable that he was too scared by the presence of the robots and what happened to Chuck to think to try it. I can assume that the magic all over the world just happened to give the ring a brand new power that Chuck didn't give it, which already has to be the reason why Sonic is fast. I've read someone stupidly argue that everyone in Sonic has chi, and anyone could be capable of any power. But that's bullshit because then everyone would have tried to run at Sonic's speed to imitate him, and tried to fly to imitate Tails, and done so. And then they wouldn't ever be seen as special for that. Since rings grant any wish you want in Archie, logically Sonic would have done this in Archie, and used up every ring he could find on other Robians. Not even that, if there's no limit on how big a wish a ring can grant, then he should have been able to wish that every Robian was no longer a robot. But then Chuck wouldn't have gotten to be a robot spy for Sonic. So he wouldn't have gotten to do some of the cool and useful things he did. Most of what he did. His stint as a robot spy is the entire reason I had gone to respect him. Before then, while he had a cool hobby, I still thought he was a lame idiot. They could have had him become a spy if Eggman somehow roboticized him again, which is what I assume happens, because he's only in one more book after this. Then Eggman could explain to himself why he's not using the ring by thinking that he just always thinks it's better to use it for a boost. Realistically, Mutsky whimpers and rubs his nose against Sonic because he's disoriented. Chuck is asking where they are when it's supposed to be that they remember their old lives as Robians, which makes more sense since why would their brains not store memories in the same place just because they're made of metal instead of neurons? The story ends with some pointless narration that gives false hope that Mobius will be freed someday. This story by Michael Teitelbaum was in a vacuum a superior adaptation of the plots of What If Sonic and Eggman Were Kids Together and the second story of Archie Sonic, so technically it was good. It was only extremely boring for me because I had already read the two Archie Sonic stories it appears to be plagiarizing, and it's a novel, the most boring medium ever, and it makes itself more boring by being padded out and derivative. I don't know why this writer is allowed to use other people's stories without crediting them, but he shouldn't be unless he can't come up with a good original story. And it's gonna turn out that he can. Because it wasn't a new plot, I had to force myself to read all of it. It had a version of What If Sonic and Eggman Were Kids Together from Archie Sonic issue 3, where Chuck didn't grab Sonic angrily like a bad parent and defend Eggman by giving him a backstory that was incongruent with SatAM. But there's a few minor problems. It ramped up Eggman's incompetence saying that he had 9 robots break down in a row. SatAM Eggman especially is not the kind of guy you should be depicting as someone who started out lame. Half the reason people defend the show is because he looks cool for ruling the world so long. It also had a version of the second story of Archie, where Sonic was shown looking cool, having a believable hobby for his age by playing baseball against others as his own team entirely. And Eggman's trap for Sonic was more impressive and creative. There's also a much better thought out ending, Because Sonic has the common sense to destroy every robot near the Robians, so he can get away with picking up and carrying his loved ones to Knothole. Perhaps he only thought to do that because Sally got grabbed by a robot. Then he dearbonicizes them both, which is arbitrary for this book, because the rings don't have the disastrous lore that they can grant any wish, which would include a wish that nobody would ever be evil again. But when you apply that to Archie, it makes Archie's story look much worse, because in it, Sonic and Sally somehow never thought to wish that every Robian was dearbonicized with the ring, let alone Chuck and Mudscape.